The story of Pablo's struggle against his enemies is a dramatic tale of power, danger, and survival. It is a chapter in the life of a man who had risen to the top, only to find that the top was the most dangerous place to be. Pablo Escobar, once the unchallenged ruler of his empire, was now facing the greatest challenge of his life. Chapter 9. Tensions rise. In the heart of Colombia's tumultuous landscape, the saga of Pablo Escobar reached a critical juncture. The once unassailable kingpin, who had navigated the dangerous waters of the criminal world with deft and cunning, now faced a storm of challenges. This chapter captures the mounting tensions and dramatic confrontations that marked a turning point in Pablo's reign. Pablo's empire, vast and complex, had become a fortress under siege. The continuous pressure from law enforcement agencies, both local and international, was intensifying. Raids, surveillance, and relentless investigations were daily realities. The authorities were tightening the net, leaving Pablo fewer places to hide and fewer moves to make. Simultaneously, the underworld, a realm of shadowy alliances and cutthroat competition, was turning against Pablo. Rival cartels, envious of his wealth and power, were no longer content to stay in the background. They began to openly challenge him, vying for control of territories and trade routes. The streets of Colombia became battlegrounds, where loyalty was scarce and betrayal was a common currency. Pablo, though cornered, was not defeated. He responded with a mix of strategic maneuvers and sheer force. He knew the art of war in the criminal world. It was not just about firepower, it was about outsmarting the enemy. He employed tactics that were ingenious and ruthless, keeping his adversaries off balance, but the relentless pressure was taking its toll. Pablo, who had always been a step ahead, found himself grappling with dilemmas that had no easy answers. Each decision he made carried immense weight, impacting not just his empire, but also the lives of those around him. The man who had once been untouchable was now facing vulnerabilities from all sides. The confrontations with rival cartels grew more frequent and more violent. Pablo's once impenetrable network of allies and informants began to show cracks. Trust, a rare commodity in the underworld, was now even scarcer. Pablo had to constantly look over his shoulder, aware that his enemies were always plotting. The tension spilled over into Pablo's personal life. His family, once insulated from his criminal activities, found themselves caught in the crossfire. Pablo's role as a family man was tested as he struggled to keep his loved ones safe in a world where danger lurked in every shadow. Pablo's relationship with his closest associates also became strained. Loyalty, which had been the cornerstone of his rise to power, was now in question. The people he had trusted with his life were under immense pressure, and Pablo knew that under such circumstances, even the most loyal could turn. In the face of mounting challenges, Pablo's character was revealed. He showed moments of brilliance, devising strategies that defied the odds. But he also showed signs of the toll the constant battles were taking on him. The stress, the paranoia, and the unending struggle for survival began to wear down even the mightiest of kingpins. As the stakes grew higher, so did the intensity of the confrontations. Pablo found himself embroiled in battles that were not just about territory or money, but about survival. Each move he made was a gamble, each decision a matter of life and death. The story of Pablo Escobar at this juncture is a testament to the volatile nature of power. It shows how quickly fortunes can change, how the hunter can become the hunted. Pablo, once the master of his domain, was now fighting on multiple fronts, against forces that were closing in from all directions. As tensions rose, Pablo was forced to make decisions that would have far-reaching consequences. Decisions that would define not just his future, but the future of his empire. In the world of crime and power, where every action had a reaction, Pablo was about to set off a chain of events that would alter the course of his life forever. Chapter 10. The Price of Power. In the bustling heart of Colombia, a story of power and its costs was unfolding. Pablo Escobar, a name that once commanded awe and fear, was now confronting the price of his chosen path. This chapter delves into the often hidden costs of Pablo's lifestyle, revealing the impact on his mental and emotional well-being. Pablo, at the peak of his power, lived a life that many could only dream of. Wealth, influence, and luxury were his daily companions. But beneath the surface of this seemingly enviable existence, there was a hidden toll. The very things that gave him power were also the sources of immense pressure. As the kingpin of a vast criminal empire, Pablo was constantly in the crosshairs of law enforcement and rivals. This constant threat created a life of paranoia and tension. Pablo could trust no one completely. Betrayal could come from any corner. The man who once walked the streets of Medellin with confidence now looked over his shoulder with suspicion. This state of constant vigilance began to wear on Pablo. Sleepless nights were common, as his mind raced with the strategies and threats of his empire. The burden of leadership, of maintaining power and control over such a vast operation, was immense. It was a mental load that never eased, a weight that he carried every moment of every day. The stress of his lifestyle also took a toll on Pablo's relationships. His family, once the cornerstone of his life, now lived in the shadow of his activities. His wife and children, though living in luxury, were isolated, their lives dictated by the necessities of security and secrecy. The normal joys of family life were tainted by the ever-present danger that surrounded them. Pablo's emotional well-being was also affected. The constant battles, the need for ruthlessness, and the violence of his world left little room for warmth and genuine connection. He was surrounded by people, associates, bodyguards, staff, but genuine friendship and trust were rare. The loneliness at the top was a reality that Pablo faced daily. Despite his wealth, Pablo's life was one of confinement. His movements were restricted. He could not enjoy the simple pleasures of life without elaborate security measures. The freedom that he had sought through power was, in many ways, an illusion. He was a prisoner of his own empire, bound by the very chains he had created. The impact on his mental health was significant. The pressures of leadership, the constant threats, and the isolation led to mood swings and bouts of depression. Pablo, the man who had risen so high, was grappling with the darkness that came with his life choices. As the law enforcement efforts intensified, so did Pablo's sense of being trapped. The walls were closing in, both literally and figuratively. The choices he had to make became harder, the consequences more severe. The balance between maintaining power and preserving his sanity was becoming increasingly difficult to manage. Pablo's story at this stage is a stark reminder of the true cost of power. It shows that beyond the glamour and the headlines, there is a human cost, a price paid in mental and emotional well-being. The king of an empire, Pablo was also a man battling the demons that came with his throne. As Pablo faced these challenges, his story took on a new dimension. It was no longer just a tale of power and crime. It was also a story of a human being facing the consequences of his choices. The price of power was not just about the money, the legal battles, or the loss of freedom. It was also about the cost to Pablo's soul. Chapter 11. Betrayals. In the heart of Colombia's turbulent world of power and crime, the tale of Pablo Escobar was taking a darker turn. The man who once seemed invincible, surrounded by loyal followers, was now facing the bitter sting of betrayal. This chapter delves into the treacheries within Pablo's inner circle, revealing the fragility of trust in his perilous world. Pablo had built his empire on a foundation of fear and loyalty. His inner circle was composed of those he believed were his most trusted associates. These were men and women who had been with him through various trials, who had stood by him as he built his criminal empire. But in the world Pablo lived in, trust was as fragile as glass. As the pressures on Pablo's empire mounted, cracks began to appear within his inner circle. The unbreakable bond he thought he shared with his closest allies started to unravel. One by one, those he had trusted began to turn against him. The first signs of betrayal came subtly. Information that should have been confidential leaked out. Plans that were meticulously laid out started failing. Pablo, with his keen instincts, sensed that something was amiss. He knew that these were not mere coincidences or bad luck. There was a traitor, or perhaps more than one, within his ranks. Pablo's reaction to these betrayals was a mix of anger and disbelief. He had never expected that those he considered loyal would turn against him. He had shared meals with these people, had laughed and planned with them. To find that they were now working against him was a blow that shook the very foundations of his trust. The betrayals were not just personal. They were strategic blows to his empire. Each defection, each act of treachery weakened his hold on power. His enemies, both within the law enforcement and rival cartels, were using these betrayals to their advantage, chipping away at Pablo's empire. One of the most painful betrayals came from someone Pablo had considered a close friend. This was a person he had trusted implicitly, someone he had confided in. The revelation of this betrayal was, more than just a loss of an ally, it was a personal wound, a betrayal of friendship that cut deeper than any business treachery could. The reasons for these betrayals were varied. Some were driven by fear, as Pablo's enemies exerted pressure on his associates. Others were swayed by greed, tempted by offers of money or safety in exchange for turning against Pablo. And for some, it was the realization that Pablo's empire was crumbling, and they wanted to be on the winning side when it fell. Pablo's world, once ruled by his iron fist, was now a maze of suspicion and paranoia. He no longer knew whom to trust. Meetings with his inner circle became tense affairs, where every word was weighed, every glance scrutinized for signs of treachery. These betrayals forced Pablo to make hard decisions. He had to tighten his inner circle, to push away even those he had once considered loyal. He became more isolated, relying on a very small group of people, and even then, with a lingering sense of doubt about their loyalty. The impact of these betrayals on Pablo's mental state was profound. He became more cautious, more withdrawn. The man who had once been bold and fearless was now looking over his shoulder, second-guessing every decision. The betrayals had not just weakened his empire, they had weakened him.
Pablo's response to the betrayals was a mix of retribution and strategic realignment. He knew he could not show weakness, that he had to maintain his image as the unchallenged leader. But internally, he was reeling from the realization that the loyalty he had valued so much was, in the end, fragile and fleeting.
The chapter of betrayals in Pablo Escobar's life is a stark reminder of the volatile nature of power. It shows how quickly alliances can change, how trust can be broken, and how even the mightiest can be brought down by those they once counted as their closest allies. In the world of crime and power, betrayal was not just a possibility, it was an ever-present danger. Chapter 12. The Manhunt Begins. In the dynamic and often perilous world of Colombia, a dramatic turn of events was unfolding. Law enforcement agencies, both local and international, had intensified their efforts to capture the elusive Pablo Escobar. The scene was set for a thrilling cat-and-mouse game, a pursuit that would test the wits and resolve of both the hunter and the hunted. The manhunt for Pablo was not just a mission, it was an operation of unprecedented scale. Task forces were assembled, comprising the best and brightest from various law enforcement agencies. These were men and women dedicated to one cause, bringing Pablo to justice. The stakes were high, and the world was watching. Pablo, aware of the tightening noose, was not one to stand still. He had evaded capture many times, slipping through the fingers of the authorities with a mix of cunning and luck. But this time, it was different. The intensity of the manhunt was unlike anything he had faced before. The streets of Colombia, once Pablo's domain, were now a chessboard where a high-stakes game was being played. The law enforcement agencies used every tool at their disposal: surveillance, informants, and cutting-edge technology. They combed through cities and jungles, following every lead, every tip, determined to corner Pablo. Pablo, in turn, used his deep knowledge of the land and his network of allies to stay one step ahead. He moved from place to place, never staying long enough to be caught. He was a shadow, a ghost in the very land he once ruled with an iron fist. The manhunt brought a sense of urgency to the streets of Colombia. People watched with bated breath as news updates flooded in, each hinting at the possibility of Pablo's capture. The country was gripped by the drama of the chase, a real-life thriller unfolding in their midst. As the pursuit continued, it became more than just a physical chase. It was a battle of strategy and intelligence. The law enforcement had to think like Pablo, anticipate his moves, and outsmart him. For Pablo, it was about using all his experience and instincts to stay free, to outwit a force that seemed omnipresent. The pressure on Pablo was immense. The constant movement, the need to always be alert, took its toll on him. He was no longer the untouchable kingpin. He was now a fugitive, a man running for his life. The irony was not lost on him. The hunter had become the hunted. In the midst of this intense manhunt, there were close calls, moments when Pablo narrowly escaped, when it seemed that the authorities had him cornered, only for him to slip away at the last moment. Each escape was a testament to his ingenuity, but also a sign of how desperate his situation had become. The manhunt was not just a physical pursuit, it was also a psychological one. Pablo, once feared and respected, was now being chased like a common criminal. This shift in perception affected him deeply. He was fighting not just for his freedom, but also for his legacy. As days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, the manhunt continued. It was a relentless pursuit, a game of cat and mouse that stretched across the beautiful and rugged terrain of Colombia. The authorities were determined, but so was Pablo. It was a standoff, a test of endurance and will. The story of the manhunt for Pablo Escobar is a gripping chapter in his life. It is a tale of pursuit and evasion, of a man who had once been at the top of his world, now running to stay ahead of the law. The manhunt was not just about capturing a criminal, it was about the relentless pursuit of justice, about the determination to end the reign of one of the most notorious figures in the history of crime.
Chapter 13. Life on the Run.
The once powerful Pablo Escobar, who had ruled an empire with an iron fist, was now a fugitive on the run. His life had undergone a drastic transformation, from a kingpin to a man constantly on the move, evading capture at every turn. This chapter delves into Pablo's new reality, a life marked by uncertainty and constant vigilance. Gone were the days of luxury and power. Pablo's new world was one of shadows and disguise. He could no longer trust anyone fully, not even those within his closest circle. Betrayal was a constant threat, and the fear of being caught loomed over him every moment. Pablo's days and nights were spent moving from one hideout to another. These hideouts were no longer lavish mansions, but rather modest homes, often in remote areas. He had to be inconspicuous, blend in, avoid drawing any attention. Every move he made required careful planning and execution. The strain of being on the run was evident in Pablo's demeanor. The confident, charismatic leader was now cautious and often appeared weary. The stress of constantly looking over his shoulder, of always being on the move, was taking its toll. He had lost weight, and his face bore the signs of a man under immense pressure. Despite the drastic change in his circumstances, Pablo was not devoid of resources. He still had loyalists who provided him with information and assistance. These individuals, risking their own safety, helped Pablo stay one step ahead of the authorities. But even with this support, the challenge of evading capture was immense. The law enforcement agencies were relentless in their pursuit. They had informants everywhere, and the net around Pablo was tightening. Every phone call, every contact he made was a potential risk. The technology that he once used to his advantage was now a tool in the hands of his pursuers. Pablo's family, once a source of strength and comfort, was now a vulnerability. He could not be with them, as he knew this would put them in danger. The separation from his loved ones added an emotional burden to his already difficult situation. The family he had worked so hard to provide for was now out of his reach. In this new life, Pablo's interactions were limited and always shrouded in secrecy. He met with his remaining allies in hidden locations, always under the cover of darkness. These meetings were tense, often hurried, with Pablo always anxious to move to the next safe location. The psychological impact of this life on the run was profound. Pablo, who had once lived a life of certainty and control, was now in a world of unpredictability. He was constantly grappling with the uncertainty of what each day would bring. The fear of capture, the isolation, and the constant state of alertness were a far cry from his former life of power and dominance. Pablo's time on the run was a stark contrast to his years as the leader of a vast empire. It was a time of reflection, of facing the consequences of his past actions. The invincibility he once felt was replaced by the stark reality of his situation. He was no longer the kingpin. He was now a fugitive, a man whose every move was dictated by the need to stay free. This chapter in Pablo's life was a dramatic shift from his days of power. It was a testament to how quickly fortunes can change, how the hunter can become the hunted. Pablo's life on the run was a relentless test of survival, a chapter marked by fear, paranoia, and the constant shadow of capture. Chapter 14. Family under threat. As the net around Pablo Escobar tightened, a new and distressing chapter began to unfold. This was not just about Pablo anymore. It was about his family who found themselves under threat. This chapter delves into the perilous situation faced by Pablo's family as his enemies sought to exploit his most significant vulnerability. Pablo's family, once shielded from the dangers of his empire, were now in the crosshairs of those who sought to bring him down. The very people he loved and worked to protect were now potential targets, used as pawns in the high-stakes game of power and revenge. Pablo's wife, Maria Victoria, and their children had enjoyed a life of luxury and comfort, but now they faced a starkly different reality. The lavish homes and extravagant lifestyles were replaced by fear and uncertainty. They were constantly guarded, surrounded by security, not as a sign of wealth, but as a necessity for survival. The threat to Pablo's family was not an idle one. His enemies knew that attacking his family was a way to weaken him emotionally. Threatening phone calls, ominous messages, and close encounters were becoming a regular occurrence. Each day brought with it a new worry, a new fear for their safety. Maria Victoria found herself in a difficult position. She was a wife and a mother, trying to protect her children in a world that had turned hostile. She had to be strong, to provide a sense of normalcy in a situation that was anything but normal. But the strain was evident. The constant fear for the safety of her children, the worry about her husband's fate, took a heavy toll on her. Pablo's children, too young to fully understand the gravity of the situation, sensed the change. Their lives, once filled with laughter and freedom, were now restricted. Playdates, school activities, and simple outings were curtailed. Their world had shrunk to the confines of secure walls and guarded compounds. The innocence of childhood was overshadowed by the looming threat that their father's lifestyle had brought upon them. Pablo, despite being on the run and fighting for his own survival, was acutely aware of the danger his family faced. He made frantic efforts to ensure their safety, arranging for them to move to different locations, always under the watch of trusted security. But the knowledge that his family was a target haunted him. The empire he had built to provide for them had now become their biggest threat. The emotional impact on the family was profound. The once close-knit unit was fragmented, each member dealing with the situation in their own way. Maria Victoria struggled to maintain a semblance of normal family life amidst the chaos. The children grappled with the absence of their father and the unspoken fears that hung in the air. The situation was further complicated by the legal and social implications. Pablo's family found themselves isolated, shunned by many who feared associating with them. The stigma of Pablo's actions cast a long shadow over their lives. Friends became distant, and the social support they once had was eroding. In their most private moments, Pablo's family wrestled with a mix of emotions: fear, anger, sadness, and a sense of betrayal. They questioned the choices that had led them to this point, the decisions that had turned their lives upside down. The burden of Pablo's legacy was a heavy one to bear, and it was a burden they carried every day. As the threats against his family escalated, Pablo faced an agonizing dilemma. His attempts to protect them were becoming increasingly challenging. The realization that his actions had put his loved ones in danger was a painful one. It was a stark reminder of the price his family was paying for the life he had chosen. This chapter in the life of Pablo Escobar and his family is a poignant tale of the consequences of a life of crime. It highlights the often overlooked victims, the family members who, despite not being directly involved, suffer the repercussions. The story of Pablo's family under threat is a testament to the far-reaching impact of his choices, a sobering reminder of the ripple effects of a life in the underworld. Chapter 15. The Fall of an Empire. In the vibrant yet turbulent landscape of Colombia, the once mighty empire of Pablo Escobar was facing its inevitable end. This chapter chronicles the downfall of Pablo's empire, a saga marked by a series of events that led to its unraveling. The tale of the fall is one of tension, drama, and the eventual surrender to the forces that had long been in pursuit. Pablo's empire, which had once seemed invincible, began to show signs of weakness. The relentless pressure from law enforcement agencies, the betrayals within his inner circle, and the constant battles with rival cartels had taken their toll. The foundation on which the empire was built was cracking, and the cracks were growing wider by the day. The first significant blow to Pablo's empire came from within. The betrayals by his closest associates, who had been integral to the operations of his empire, created a domino effect. These defections not only weakened his operation, but also provided law enforcement with valuable insights and information. The secrets of Pablo's empire were being exposed one by one. As the information from former associates began to flow, law enforcement agencies gained a clearer picture of Pablo's operations. Raids became more frequent and more successful. Key figures in Pablo's network were captured or eliminated, further destabilizing his once unassailable empire. Pablo, who had always prided himself on being a step ahead, found himself reacting rather than acting. His moves became more desperate, his strategies less effective. The empire he had built with such cunning and ruthlessness was slipping through his fingers. The impact on Pablo's financial resources was severe. The constant need to evade capture, coupled with the loss of key revenue streams, drained his once vast wealth. The man who had once been among the richest in the world was now struggling to finance his operations and his life on the run. The fall of the empire was not just a physical dismantling. It was also a psychological one. Pablo, who had once been feared and respected, was now being chased like a common fugitive. The image of power and invincibility he had cultivated was shattered. The kingpin, who had seemed larger than life, was now exposed as a mortal, vulnerable to the same forces he had once defied. In the final stages of the empire's collapse, the confront, actions with law enforcement became more intense and frequent. Pablo's movements were constantly tracked, and every safe house he sought refuge in was eventually discovered. The net was closing in, and the options for escape were running out. The toll on Pablo's mental and emotional state was evident. The stress of being constantly on the run, the paranoia of betrayal, and the realization of his crumbling empire weighed heavily on him. The man who had once held so much power was now isolated, constantly on edge, and facing the reality of his impending downfall. Amidst this chaos, Pablo's hold on his territories weakened. Rival cartels saw an opportunity to move in on his turf. Violent clashes erupted for control of the lucrative trade routes and markets that Pablo had once dominated. The empire that was built on fear and power was being torn apart by those very elements. In a final act of desperation, Pablo attempted to negotiate with the government. He offered surrender under certain conditions, a move that was more about buying time than a genuine desire for peace. But the government, bolstered by public demand for justice and the mounting pressure from international agencies, was not in a position to negotiate. The end was near, and both Pablo and the authorities knew it. The climax of this dramatic fall came with a final, decisive operation by law enforcement. In a culmination of years of pursuit, intelligence gathering, and strategy, the forces closed in on Pablo. It was a showdown that was both symbolic and real, the fall of one of the most notorious figures in criminal history. Pablo's final moments were a stark contrast to the life he had once lived. The luxurious lifestyle, the power, the fear he instilled, all were distant memories in those last minutes. the fall of his empire was complete, and with it, the end of a chapter in Colombia's history. The story of the fall of Pablo Escobar's empire is a cautionary tale of ambition, power, and the inevitable consequences of a life built on illegal foundations. It illustrates how an empire, no matter how powerful, can crumble under the weight of its own wrongdoing. The fall was not just about the dismantling of a criminal empire. It was about the collapse of a legend, a figure who had become almost mythical in his power and influence. Pablo's downfall was a turning point, a moment that marked the end of an era in Colombia's history. It was a reminder that the pursuit of power through illicit means often leads to a destructive end. The empire that Pablo built had impacted many lives, both within Colombia and internationally, and its fall was a moment of reckoning. In the aftermath of the empire's collapse, there was a mix of relief and reflection. Relief that one of the most wanted men was no longer at large, and reflection on the cost of his reign. The legacy of Pablo Escobar's empire was a complex one, marked by violence, fear, and the disruption of a nation. Chapter 16. Legacy. In the aftermath of the fall of his empire, the story of Pablo Escobar, once a name that instilled fear and commanded power, entered its final chapter. This chapter, Legacy, reflects on how Pablo is remembered, examining the lasting impact of his actions on Colombia and the world. Pablo's legacy is a tapestry of contrasting threads, a blend of fear, admiration, infamy, and mystique. His life, marked by ambition and ruthlessness, left an indelible mark on the pages of history. In the neighborhoods of Medellin and beyond, Pablo was a figure of complexity, seen by some as a Robin Hood figure and by others as a notorious criminal. Pablo's impact on Colombia was profound. His reign had brought violence, disruption, and fear. The drug trade he helped foster had far-reaching consequences, affecting the social and political fabric of the country. The scars of his actions were etched into the lives of many, families who lost loved ones, communities that lived in fear, and a nation that grappled with a tarnished reputation. Yet, in some quarters, Pablo was remembered differently. In the poorer communities of Medellin, he was often recalled as a benefactor, a man who provided when the government did not. His acts of generosity, building homes, soccer fields, and sponsoring local events, were remembered as gestures of goodwill. This duality in perception is a testament to the complexity of his character and the impact of his actions. Internationally, Pablo's legacy took on a different dimension. He became a symbol of the global war on drugs, a representation of the dark and destructive power of the narcotics trade. His life story was retold in films, documentaries, and books, often sensationalized, adding to the myth and legend that surrounded him. The legacy of Pablo Escobar is also a reflection of the challenges faced by law enforcement and governments in combating the drug trade. His rise and fall highlighted the need for international cooperation, better policies, and more effective strategies to address the root causes of the narcotics trade and its associated violence. In the years following Pablo's demise, Colombia underwent significant changes. Efforts to combat drug trafficking were intensified, and the country worked hard to shed the image that had been cast by Pablo's shadow. Colombia's journey to rebuild its reputation and address the issues that had allowed figures like Pablo to rise was a slow but steady process. Pablo's family, who bore the brunt of his choices, also became part of his legacy. Their lives, marked by both luxury and suffering, were a reminder of the personal cost of Pablo's empire. The impact on his children, who grew up in the midst of his tumultuous reign, was particularly poignant. The legacy of Pablo Escobar is not just a story of a criminal and his empire. It is a story that raises questions about poverty, inequality, and the allure of power. It challenges us to think about the societal conditions that allow such figures to emerge and the complex ways in which they are viewed by different segments of society. As the chapter closes on the life and times of Pablo Escobar, his legacy remains a subject of debate and reflection. He is remembered as a figure who shaped not just the history of Colombia, but also the global conversation on crime, power, and the effects of the narcotics trade. His life story, filled with drama and contradictions, continues to fascinate and provoke thought. It serves as a powerful reminder of the complexities of human nature and the multifaceted impact of one individual's choices. In Medellin and across Colombia, efforts to move beyond the shadow of Pablo's legacy are evident. The city he once controlled has transformed, striving to become a place of innovation and culture, distancing itself from its turbulent past. Yet, the legacy of Pablo Escobar remains a part of its history, a chapter that is remembered as a cautionary tale. For the world, Pablo's story is a compelling narrative about the far-reaching consequences of the drug trade. It highlights the intricate connections between crime and society and the global impact of the narcotics industry. Pablo's life serves as an example of how the pursuit of power and wealth, when rooted in illegal and unethical practices, can lead to destruction and despair. In the end, Pablo Escobar's legacy is a mosaic of different perspectives and experiences. For some, he is a villain, a symbol of the darkest aspects of human ambition. For others, he is a complex figure, a product of his environment and circumstances. And for the world, he is a reminder of the ongoing challenges in the fight against the narcotics trade and its impact on societies. As this final chapter concludes, the story of Pablo Escobar remains a topic of discussion and analysis, a narrative that continues to evolve and resonate. His legacy, complex and multifaceted, is a testament to the enduring impact of one man's life and choices on the world stage. As we conclude this captivating story of Pablo Escobar, we hope it has not only enhanced your English skills, but also provided a deep dive into a complex and intriguing chapter of history. If you've enjoyed this journey and would like to revisit it at your own pace, we invite you to download the complete story in PDF format on our website, wooenglish.com. We would also love to hear your thoughts and reflections on this story, so please leave us a comment and like if you found this journey enriching. Your feedback is immensely valuable and helps us continue to bring fascinating stories to life for English learners like you. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to bringing you more engaging stories at Woo English.